Every electric car, every grid-level battery, every solar farm, they all depend on raw materials, and Africa holds many of those materials. But Africa's role has been extraction, not leadership. That's changing. In this film, we show how Africa is central to the world's clean energy future, and what it will take for the continent to reap real benefits. Electric vehicle and battery industries rely on cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, copper, rare earth elements. Many of these lie in Africa, or in African mining zones. Africa holds an estimated 30% of key minerals used for renewable technologies. Cobalt is essential in many lithium-ion battery chemistries, especially NMC, nickel manganese cobalt. The Democratic Republic of the Congo, DRC, produces the largest share of the world's cobalt. In recent years, its share has ranged around 74% of global mined cobalt. However, nearly none of that cobalt is refined or processed within the DRC. Most refinement happens in China, giving Chinese firms outsized control over supply chains. Artisanal and small-scale mining contributes a non-trivial share of DRC's cobalt. Estimates suggest around 12% of cobalt output comes from ASM, often with poor safety, child labor, and governance issues. Outside cobalt, Africa has growing lithium prospects. Countries like Zimbabwe, Namibia, and Mali are receiving exploration attention. Other metals like nickel, copper, and rare earths are also present in various regions. The challenge: many African countries export raw ore or concentrate with minimal value addition. Upgrading, refining, and battery manufacturing mostly take place abroad. Mineral markets are volatile. In 2025, DRC imposed quotas on cobalt exports in response to price collapse and oversupply concerns. This measure aims to stabilize global supply and prices, but may also restrict access for downstream industries. Additionally, supply disruptions from conflict, infrastructure bottlenecks, and regulation shifts have repeatedly constrained output over decades. For example, the DRC's cobalt sector has faced periodic export bans and shutdowns tied to price crashes and governance reforms. Hydropower remains a backbone in many African systems, especially in Central and Eastern Africa. Geothermal opportunities exist in the Rift Valley and wind corridors in coastal and Sahel regions. As of 2024, Africa added 4.2 GW of new renewable capacity, modest compared to global additions but a steady increase. But Africa still accounts for only about 1.5% of global renewable capacity. South Africa and North Africa, despite being less populous, host a disproportionate share of Africa's installed power capacity and investment. In contrast, Sub-Saharan Africa, home to most of Africa's people, lags in reliable grid access. Many regions rely on diesel generators or face frequent outages. Given infrastructure challenges, off-grid solar and storage solutions are expanding rapidly. Mini-grids and home solar kits are enabling energy access in rural or peripheral areas. These decentralized systems bypass grid constraints and reduce dependence on fossil backup power. Africa's energy transition is underfunded. Although Africa sees growing interest, its share of global energy investment remains low. Forecasts show that in 2025, fossil fuels will still dominate Africa's power capacity, with renewables projected to rise to about 45% by 2035. Large-scale projects often hinge on foreign investment. Many projects stall due to regulatory risk, currency volatility, and political instability. China dominates not just mineral refining but also solar manufacturing, battery assembly, and value chain control. Chinese firms finance and build solar projects across Africa, often securing favorable procurement terms. In cobalt refining, China is the primary hub, processing ore imported from DRC and elsewhere. China-led initiatives also extend to critical infrastructure and resource agreements across Africa. The US and Europe seek to counterbalance Chinese dominance by diversifying supply chains, offering investment alternatives, and promoting local value addition. They prioritize critical minerals alliances, trade incentives, capacity building, and clean energy financing frameworks. However, US engagement has often been slower and more fragmented compared to China's integrated supply chain approach. The EU has its own green industrial strategy. India, Japan, South Korea, and other Asian countries are entering Africa's resource and renewable sectors as well. The result: Africa is increasingly the arena of geopolitical competition, not just bilateral trade. African nations now have leverage. They can negotiate for technology transfer, higher royalties, domestic processing rights, and even joint ventures. But there is risk, becoming a battleground of external powers, with projects designed to extract value rather than build local capacity. Across Africa, startups are emerging in solar, battery storage, microgrids, electrification, and smart energy systems. These firms can localize part of the value chain. Some push toward electric mobility for African cities, energy access in informal settlements, and off-grid industrial power. To capture more value, many African governments now propose policies that require local processing, beneficiation, mineral refining, and manufacturing. Under the African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA, intra-African trade in green goods could be accelerated. Large-scale mining and renewable projects pose environmental and social challenges: land rights, water use, biodiversity, resettlement, pollution. Effective regulation, community consultation, and strict environmental standards are essential. Corruption and weak institutions remain obstacles in many jurisdictions. Botswana is developing solar parks and exploring battery storage and hydrogen pathways. Kenya and Ethiopia using geothermal and wind to diversify generation. Djibouti's Grand Barra solar plant, planned 25 MW, showcases small country ambition. Niger's Tarka wind power station, 250 MW, is among its first large-scale wind projects. These examples show that while big economies lead, smaller states also aspire to join the green economy. If current trends continue, renewables could comprise 45% of Africa's installed capacity by 2035, up from Bhutan's 31% or lower in 2025. However, this depends on resolving financing constraints, scaling grid modernization, and institutional reforms. Strategic policy levers include regional integration of power pools, strong local content rules, transparent, stable investment regimes, public-private partnerships, R&D investments, and strong environmental and social safeguards. Risks and threats include volatile commodity prices, resource nationalism, conflict, macroeconomic instability, infrastructure gaps, and climate impacts affecting hydropower. If Africa succeeds, it can become a global green resource hub, exporting not just raw minerals but batteries, components, and renewable electricity. African nations could capture far more value from the global clean energy transition. Africa is not a backdrop to the energy transition, it is at its center. The question is not whether the world will need Africa, but whether Africa will have the power, policy, and infrastructure to lead. What happens in the next decade will determine whether Africa remains a resource appendage or becomes the architect of its own green future.